During the mid-1800s, J.P. Manrow, an accomplished civil engineer and talented mathematician, constructed an impressive Swiss chalet atop Russian Hill in San Francisco. The residence, famously called the Manrow House, stood as a grand symbol of prosperity and affluence. Yet, unsettling rumors circulated that the house harbored a sinister spirit. Mr. Manrow, often featured in the San Francisco Chronicle for his engineering projects across the city, earned the nickname Judge Advocate of the Vigilance Committee. This organization was revitalized that year in reaction to the murder of journalist James King of William and the escalating crime rates in San Francisco following the gold rush. Around 1856, Mrs. Manrow's sister and niece paid a visit. They had recently returned from Hawaii, and Mrs. Manrow's sister suspected that something had trailed her from the islands to the Manrow house. Shortly after their visit, peculiar occurrences unfolded within the mansion. Family members reported objects moving inexplicably, with salt and sugar mysteriously swapped. Most chillingly, Mr. Manrow narrowly escaped a hurled axe upon entering the empty kitchen. In 1856, at approximately 40 years old, Manrow confided the haunting occurrences to his close friends, William H. Rhodes, a writer, and Almarin Brooks Paul, who co-published the True Californian daily newspaper with Rhodes and Washington Bartlett. The friends proposed an investigation by arranging a séance. The initial séance occurred on the evening of September 19, 1856, with the three men accompanied by Mrs. Manrow, her sister, and her niece. Paul, brimming with anticipation for the séance to commence, inquired of Mrs. Manrow whether she felt apprehensive. Mrs. Manrow responded, "No, it was rather terrible at first, but we're used to it now. In fact, I confess I am rather more annoyed and indignant than terrified. These spirits, or whatever they are, seem so childish and petulant that I cannot understand it at all. Today I bought an expensive bonnet downtown. When I got home I laid it upon the piano. The next moment I turned to look at it again, and just while my back was turned for an instant, every feather had been plucked from the bonnet." Immediately upon forming a circle in the library, tumultuous events unfolded. The doorbell rang with intense and persistent urgency. The table lifted a foot off the ground and hovered briefly. Sofa cushions were flung about the room. Loud knocks reverberated throughout the room, and books were hurled across the space, with one striking Mrs. Manrow on the head. Paul retrieved the book and set it on the table, only to see it open by itself. After he closed it, the book reopened spontaneously. The passage about travel contained a biblical quote, "Cannot ye discern the signs of the times?" Moreover, everyone in the circle felt unseen hands pinching, pulling hair, and punching them. The 6 individuals initiated a dialogue with the spirit using a sequence of knocks. Initially, the ghost claimed to be James King of William. Disbelieving this, they challenged the spirit, and on the second attempt, it disclosed its identity as Capitana, an elderly Hawaiian woman known to Mrs. Manrow's sister during her time in Honolulu. Once more, they urged the spirit to manifest physically. Abruptly, a bush outside violently rattled against the window. In the near full moonlight, a figure briefly emerged beside it, illuminated for a few fleeting moments. Mr. Manrow, seemingly incredulous, dared Capitana to awaken a servant who was sleeping in another building. No sooner had he spoken than the servant burst into the kitchen, clearly frightened. Shortly after, the group witnessed a terrifying apparition materialize. Rhodes provided a detailed description of the event to the Sacramento Union newspaper, which was published on October 21, 1856. And I quote, "This terrible apparition was the most frightful figure that ever the human eye beheld. Language is utterly inadequate to describe it. There it reclined in the clear moonlight, silent, still, and sublime in its horrible deformity. If all the fiends in hell had combined their features into one masterpiece of ugliness and revolting hideousness of countenance, they could not have produced a face so full of horrors. It was blacker than the blackest midnight that ever frowned in starless gloom over the storm-swept ocean. Over its head and body it had spread a mantle of the most stainless white. It looked like a robe of new-fallen snow covering the blackened remains of a conflagration. It seemed as though personified sin had snatched the garment of a seraph as he floated by, and spread it over its thunder-scarred and hell-scorched form. Its face was turned toward us in profile, and I saw upon its features an expression of cruelty and revenge, darkened by the frown of everlasting despair. Hope never sat there." End of quote. The group, horrified, stared in disbelief at the goblin-like figure. Everyone promptly fled from the kitchen. The spirit then shot through the wall and out into the night, tearing a front gate in the process and flinging it 10 feet away. Once again, chaos erupted in the library. Furniture and rugs levitated, a cushion struck Rhodes, and one of the terrified women was hit by a chair. Instead of escaping, the group decided to summon, and I quote, the spirits of the beautiful and good, end of the quote, to counteract the presence of the goblin. They returned to the seance table in the library. This time, benevolent spirits appeared. The group felt the cool touch of these spirits, which reassured them by gently stroking their hair and faces. Paul and Rhodes claimed they could see the spirits' hands. For a brief period of 6 minutes there was peace. Rhodes described the dozen spirits as appearing solid, like flesh and blood. At Manrow's request, a spirit touched his jaw, relieving him of severe toothache and cold. Rhodes believed the spirits were trying to make amends for the frightening experience. The pleasant spiritual interaction ended when the group concluded the seance at 1 in the morning. The following evening, still in disbelief, the group held another seance. Various spirits materialized, visible in the bright moonlight outside. Initially, a young ghost girl, appearing to be around 10 to 12 years old, manifested at the library window. Another manifestation appeared against the window, prompting a scream from Mrs. Manrow. This figure was humanoid, tall and slender, reminiscent of what is now known as a shadow person. It entered the house through the wall, seemingly playing a game by disappearing and reappearing several times, effortlessly passing through the solid walls of the house. During these occurrences, Paul was repeatedly jolted out of his chair in a distant corner of the room, as if nudged by unseen forces. The group then requested a demonstration, asking that Paul be lifted and thrown onto the seance table. This request was promptly fulfilled. Paul recounted feeling a grip on his coat collar, followed by being lifted from the floor and forcefully propelled onto the table. Fortunately, he sustained no injuries. The group concluded their second session around 1 in the morning. They gathered for a third and ultimate seance on a subsequent night. After a few moments of silence, sudden and intense activity ensued. Rolled-up maps and globes were flung from the bookcases. One globe rolled across the floor, gaining speed until it collided with a window, shattering the glass. The group requested to witness the forms of the spirits behind the disturbances. A wispy orb materialized, devoid of any shadow. It moved away from the exterior window and changed into the likeness of a newly dug grave, softly illuminated on the ground. Eventually, it shifted into a slender line and slowly disappeared. The Manrows reported ongoing visits from these spirits in their residence, now nicknamed the House of Demons, for several months. Then, suddenly the encounters stopped. Some believed the spirits had departed, while others held on to different opinions. In any event, Mr. Manrow passed away and the house was eventually sold to John G. Klumpke, a formidable man rumored in the newspapers to be a terror to unruly spirits. Klumpke lived in the house until his death and never reported experiencing any paranormal activity. After Klumpke's death in December 1916, the house was demolished, and in 1927, the plot was redeveloped into an apartment building that remains there today. San Francisco, a city of beauty and history, but beneath the surface, shadows lurk. Ghosts of the past, trapped between worlds. They remind us that death is not the end, it is merely a transition. These stories send shivers down our spines, they make us question what we know, and what lies beyond the veil. Please support this channel, please like, subscribe, and comment, thank you very much.